Hi there everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our series on survival, awaken and growing your business out of coronavirus. So the first session we concentrated on leadership and we hope you found it useful. And today we're extending that conversation a little bit to think about people. So the first session was really about understanding your role as a leader and what you can do to embrace this change and to look within yourself to make some leadership changes and to kind of step up and lead your company. This second episode is really about making sure that your people are looked after. And before we kick off, I think, again, it's worth pausing and appreciating how your teams may be feeling at this point. So even if you're an organisation, where you just work with a small team, or whether you're a larger organisation, I think the realities are that your people will be feeling a multitude of things. Some of your teams may be desperate to get back into the workplace, even in the virtual world. Some people may be feeling completely overwhelmed, very anxious. They may feel uncertainty in terms of the future of the business and their own job security. So I think it's really important that we make sure that we remember that through this episode.
Yeah, and also I think it's really important to recognise the fact that you as leaders will also be feeling all of those things. And, often we're, looking to our leaders to show us through these difficult times, and they've often got the answers, or they can take us to the future state that we want to be a part of. But who knows what the rest of this year looks like, let alone next year or beyond that. So we don't underestimate this is a massive challenge for leaders at the moment. And I think it was just important that we recognise that before we went on with the module.
Absolutely. And I think it's about this feeling of coming together. And in the first module, we obviously talked about how leaders shouldn't be expected to have all the answers and not feel the pressure to deliver all the answers, and that actually the right thing to do to be a multiplier. If you remember, that was one of the themes we discussed, is this idea of diminishers versus multipliers. Is how do you create that atmosphere within your business where you want your people to be happy, safe, secure, but to thrive and to really think about their human potential. So that's why we felt that these two modules went hand in hand, because this is about leaders, managers, but also about teams. And it's about this unity of coming together at the time of uncertainty to try and build the business and to help it to go on to succeed and thrive.
I love it. So what model are we going to go through today, Charlotte?
So I know that we're both a little bit obsessed with management books, but obviously a very sad pastime. But so obviously through this process, we've both been going through dusting off our old books and picking out the best ones. So my book that I'm going to be focusing on is a book by a very well-known leadership and human resources clever person, for want of a better author. It's probably a better description as clever person, but he's a very clever person, Dave Ulrich, and he authored a book with his other half, and who's a psychologist, and they created this fab book called The Why of Work. And that's what I'll be concentrating on today, giving people a little bit of a sneak peek into the book and why I think it's useful.
Great. And I think if we've planned this correctly, I will bring in some of Carol Dweck's growth mindset work into that bit. But I think we're going to try and keep it pretty choppy between the two, bring maximum engagement.
Yeah, ducking and weaving.
That's it, yeah.
It's like me trying to use sporting analogies and
make me think of the dodgeball film, dodge, dive, dip, dodge and duck, or whatever it is. Yeah.
It reminded me of Del Boy and Rodney. Only Fools and Horses. Anyway, we digress.
Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah.
7 modules, 7 bits.
7 bits, seven aspects. And yes, so what Dave Ulrich suggests within this, so the concept of it is, I have to be careful at how I frame it. So the why of work is about this yin and yang. So there's 2 sides of a workplace. So we obviously need to make sure, especially now more than ever, that we're creating strong cultures, positive environments, that we're thinking about our staff's well-being, never more than now, in terms of their mental health, their resilience, their learning. So the model has loads of different dimensions, but before I go through those dimensions, it's important to point out, let's not pretend that business is about, whatever business you're in, even in the charitable sector, is about making cash, right? And obviously cash flow is king in business. So within this model or this thinking, it's about how can we make really strong teams, happy individuals that are loyal, that feel secure, that feel motivated, inspired in their working world, but at the same time, how can they contribute positively towards the organisation and essentially make the organisation cash? Because it's win-win, right? If the organisation becomes more profitable, brings in more revenue, then the staff is more secure. So it's this nexus, this vicious circle of how we need to pull it all together. So this isn't about saying we need to do all these things to keep staff happy regardless or despite revenue. This is about being aware that the long game is about business growth, but to be able to get there, you kind of need to identify these 7 different themes.
But I think often with these sort of things, people are like a little bit hush-hush. It's like, well, don't tell anyone. The actual reason we're doing this is because it's going to be really good for us and it's going to make us a load of money. But it's like, well, why is that a bad thing for us to align our people's values and visions and hopes and dreams, or whatever you want to call it, with our own, make what we're doing bigger so that they can develop and grow and have new aspirations and stuff that we can help facilitate, because we'll all benefit from that. This isn't like exactly like you say, some sort of employee engagement scheme that's kind of, yeah, we're just doing this, but actually it means we keep them in the office for another couple of hours a day, that, you know, so we get a bit of extra bang for our buck out of them. This is a genuine, from my understanding of when we've discussed it, a more sort of embedded sort of philosophy.
Absolutely, and it's meant to be, whilst this is an overused word, organic, and it is meant to be, you know, thinking about how you can collectively create positive environments that, I mean, let's face it, you work for longer than you're with your friends and family and loved ones. So I always feel that, I think I mentioned it briefly in the first module, like Nike are amazing at doing this work. American organizations are amazing at creating abundance, because they know that creating or looking at these dimensions, which I'll run through in a sec, creates happy, loyal, productive workers that stay in the business for a long time. And I was at Nike for 13 years, and that was quite a short tenure. And a lot of people are there their entire career, and it's the most fabulous environment, because in retrospect, looking at Ulrich's dimensions, they tick every single one of them. And I can count on one hand the amount of bad days I had at Nike, the days that that a lot of people talk about that kind of Sunday night, Monday morning feeling, that like dread of, oh my God, I've got to go to work. And I had that, I can count on one hand the amount of times in 13 years I felt happy to go to work. I felt productive. I felt, inspired, all of these things. And so it works because people are retained, talent's retained. And we talked about Liz Wiseman and the multipliers. It's like, if you create these strong environments, then the A players that they talk about, not that I'm suggesting I'm an A player, but let's just pretend I might be. But the idea is it fuels other A players. It brings other A players in. It encourages people to up their game by creating these really positive working environments. So hopefully that's given everyone a bit of a backstory in terms of why we're selecting this first model. So I'm just going to run through what the 7 different attributes are. And the idea is within the book, and if you're interested, it can be purchased from all good book retailers, is they all work in combination. So there's some interesting tables that you can follow in terms of like a cause and effect. So the first one is all about instilling a positive psychology in the workplace. The second being about social responsibility and purpose. So again, we've talked about this a little bit. A lot of people call it the triple bottom line. And interestingly, within that model, the CSR model, profit is one of the 3 components that academics consider when businesses talk about their purpose. So again, that profitability thing's key. The third one is around high performing teams, and we'll cover that in a sec. Positive work environments and cultures is the fourth. Employee engagement, growth, learning and resilience, number 6, and civility and happiness being the 7th. So it's really a clear format to follow. And as I say in the book, it kind of takes you through stage by stage, section by section, in terms of the realities of, for instance, growth, learning and resilience. So, you know, the human need to evolve and improve, and what happens if an organization doesn't embrace that. And obviously resilience at a time of uncertainty like we're seeing now is pretty poignant, right?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to sort of tackle the growth, learning and resilience thing first, if that's okay. And I think to underpin this, I will give some context to Carol Dweck's work. She wrote a book called Growth Mindset, which basically laid out the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And to give fixed mindset some context, there's lots of things that we inherently assume you either are good at or you're not, like art or maths or languages or things that we inherently have traits for. And we just assume that we can't get any better at those. So maths being one for me, horrendous, terrible. But I'd like to think I've probably got better in my years than when I was at school. If I haven't, then I'm in serious trouble. And then growth mindset gives us the ability to look at the same issue but through different lenses. So we're looking at it as an opportunity to learn, we're looking at it as an opportunity to get better, and it removes us from the chance to make excuses or to avoid problems because we don't want to have that fear of failure. So in the book, and this is probably more of a Why of Work Dave Ulrich book review than it is a Carol Dweck book review, but in the book, which I'd really recommend, by the way, also available from all good retailers, is that it talks about how those things, art, language, all the rest of it, and they did this massive study where they got people who were awful at art, and some of the pictures are in the book, and honestly, I think my 6 and 7-year-old could draw better than some of these adults. But they got these people, put them through a drawing class, and showed at the end that there was a massive improvement. Now, look, they're no Picasso at the end of it, but there was an improvement, and that's all we're focused on. Is we're focused on growth and improvement. And I think then just thinking about this from another angle is, if your objective is to get better and to grow and improve, that is very different to the objective of being the best and at the end finish line. And I listened to this great podcast with Tony Hawk on it, who's a skateboarder. So anyone who used to play PlayStation, Tony Hawk on PS2 was the dream. But he talks about how so many pro skaters came into the scene during his tenure, and I think he's in his 40s now, which I'll fact check that. And he's been around the game for ages. And he said that loads of really talented people came on the scene. They made it. They, got a deal and whatever. But that was it for them. They didn't continually sort of give themselves to the craft of getting better and better and better. And that's the difference between the greats and the flash in the pan kind of successes. So it's this kind of, sorry, Charlotte, this sort of background lens of which you're looking at things through, of, are you looking at this as something that inherently I can or cannot do, or are you looking at this through a growth mindset of, this is an opportunity to get better, this is an opportunity to continually improve and to continue on that journey forever,
Yeah, I think that's really a really good point. And I guess to be able to encourage that mindset, it's really important that the organization is embracing that, right? Because some people, in your example and Tony Hawk, some people embrace evolution, embrace, the positive attributes of growing and learning and being better at something. and some people are a little bit more reluctant to do it for whatever reasons. And I think that, you know, the why of work and the framework that they use is about, you know, if you instill a positive psychology in the organization to encourage, to embrace the fact that yes, people are potentially going to be feeling anxious and overwhelmed at a time like this, but you encourage them to embrace positive mindsets that is going to help them through potentially a tricky time, but also that's going to help the business grow and help that individual grow. But it's all about, I guess, all of those 7 dimensions going in the same cooking pot to enable a lot of these, you know, personal growth attributes to occur.
Yeah, and I think it's underpinned by the employee feeling psychologically and emotionally safe in that environment, and it's probably a safety to make mistakes. And the thing with this sort of growth and learning and resilience is you can't be more resilient if you don't cock it up from time to time, because that's the whole point of resilience, is that you're facing up to adversity, right?
Absolutely.
So what we're talking about is, let's create an environment where we encourage forward thinking, where we encourage people challenging the status quo and thinking about things in a different way. And the only way that we can do that is if we make them feel safe to do so. So all ideas are welcome. You know, let's have that conversation. And that's very, very difficult for some leaders, because it can feel like you're being taken off course or distracting you from the mission. But all it's about is creating that space that you can allow those people to bring those ideas forward, and they're not getting branded for, you know, making mistakes. Is an encouragement of learning. And what have you learned from this situation? How can we do it better? What can I do as a manager to best support you? It's a very different conversation, isn't it? Rather than, you know.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of pull on that point, you know, where I'm going as we're discussing all of this, we're using the word environment a lot and culture a lot. And I think it's pertinent to kind of pause and to think, well, you know, the workplace has changed. The workplace has changed beyond recognition. You know, I've been listening to podcasts and interviews and reading a lot of stuff around it. And, you know, this working from home tag, you know, it's not working from home anymore. It's this working everywhere kind of concept of, you know, if you're working, you know, in your back garden, if you're working in a park, if, you know, when the cafes and restaurants opened, you work there. It's about thinking, you know, where are you going to be happiest? How are you going to be the most productive? You know, how are you going to grow? How are you going to feel engaged? And I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of organizations to embrace that. And obviously Twitter went out a couple of weeks ago and said that, you know, their new normal is that they're going to be encouraging their staff to work everywhere or work from home indefinitely, because their business can grow and survive with people being safe at home. So that employee well-being is one component. Like, you know, we have to put the safety of our staff first, but it's really important to recognise how leaders and organisations need to adapt now, to be thinking that the new normal could be a socially distant office space, could be, you know, proportion of your working week being, you know, working at home or working anywhere, and a proportion being in the office. And some people may thrive in that environment, and some people may miss that human interaction and the office banter and, you know, throwing ideas around. So it's really important that as we're suggesting this why of work, it does apply to this new normal, but leaders and managers obviously need to give some consideration to what that new normal is, but also to go softly and to engage in conversation before the businesses come out of hibernation, so that they're acknowledging it's okay to feel like you've got cabin fever. It's okay if you're feeling anxious. This is what the new normal is going to be for our organization. So it's about that collaboration and making your teams feel safe and secure in what this new normal is, but to give them a platform to feedback if it's not working for them.
Yeah, definitely. Let's segue into positive psychology then, because that's one of the bits of the model. And I thought that this sort of kind of picked with me, because I think when you think about positive psychology in the workspace, it really sort of resonated with me about this declining mental health.
Yeah.
And I know I've been public about my mental health in the past and stuff, and I'm not going to dwell on that, but just really interested with the point that you made there about the struggle it is from working from home, and how we've all got to get used to this new way of operating, and how this is going to be really difficult. And how do we create a positive psychology in a completely unknown environment that we don't know what it's going to look like? And when I was thinking about this, it made me think about the value of just open and honest communication. And when we were chatting on the leadership module, we were talking about how leaders need to just accept that they don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And I suppose it was making me think about, there's two different types of positive work environments, isn't there? There's a truly positive one, and then there's fake positive of happy clappy, softball in the car park, forced beers on, corporate things you don't want to go to. And I think you use this word a lot about organic. And I think if we can open up communication for, again, bearing in mind this growth that we're talking about, for how we want our workplaces to look like, let's open up those conversations to our teams. What is it that they need? How can we support them more? What type of things would we like in? Do we want to put in a half-hour Zoom call in the week where we just have the social time and we have a coffee together, or someone does a quiz, or those kind of things that can be free suggestions from the group, but we can then be honest about how we're feeling in this situation as well. I don't know if you had any more comments on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was just, as you were talking about it then, I was thinking, from your background and from your experience, I've kind of shared my experiences of working in an organisation that's embraced this model, even if it's not directly. So I was just interested to see if you'd had any experience of working in an organisation where you kind of felt you could grow, and that encouraged positive psychology and that cared about their people. And if you've ever had any experience of working in those kind of cultures.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a very cutthroat industry, Charlotte, but I think professional sport is that it is the art of getting better every day. And to be honest, the Southern Hemisphere coaches are a lot better at that, in my opinion. They have this sort of embedded sort of philosophy of growth, and we're going to get 5% better in 5 different areas rather than try and get 25% better in one, and the accumulation of marginal gains. And I think, especially with professional sport, or in my sport, it's a skill-based game. It's not like I just go out and run faster or try harder. Like, there's a skill element, and skills need to be practiced, and then you can get better at them. So my working environment, we are positively encouraged to grow and craft our skills, but I wouldn't say it's always been the most positive environment, because you are really, really flagged if you make a mistake, because it's the top level, right? And the best coaches or the best leaders are the ones that can see that the effort is there, and that you're pushing yourself to grow your game, and there will be mistakes along the way. So often when the new coach comes in with all his new ideas, which we've had loads of recently, if you want to know, the first few months of that season are really difficult, because everyone's trying to get their heads around a new way of playing, some new skills that we might need or whatever. But when they focus on the growth and they review based on the growth, this is where we were, this is where we are, this is where we were, this is where we are, and it just does this, but we're still going in the right direction. And of course there's going to be some big backlashes, but they're the ones that you need to give the time to enable you to get to where you want to be. I don't know if that answers your question, actually.
Yeah, it does. And I think, we could go to town on the whole marginal gains thing. And I always like to look at, I know it's sometimes a bit cheesy, but the comparisons between high performance teams in sport and business. There's probably an MBA dissertation title in that
Let me
film.
write that down.
But you know, in business, it is about marginal gain. So imagine if you embrace this idea of positive psychology in your people, and you embrace the idea of, you know, at times of uncertainty, you know, giving staff the confidence to make changes and to take risks. You know, imagine how that could move the needle. And I think that, I mean, we're working with a client at the moment who it has got huge potential in their business, and it's about encouraging their people to not stand still, but to play the long game. And actually, let's go and be bold, and let's just rewrite the playbook. Let's do something completely different that we know instinctively is probably going to move the needle, but let's empower the team to get there. And I think at a time like this, it's okay to do things differently and to embrace the fact that it could go wrong, because standing still at a time like this and not evolving is going to be dangerous for your business. I think that idea of marginal gains is you know, poignant, I suppose, if you kind of take that comparison.
Yeah, well, let's take that theme that you spoke about then, because I think this is a nice segue into high performing teams. So actually in his book, which just so happened to be on my desk, he makes the reference that high performing teams are based on highly relatable people, on the relationships between people. And I have to say, I think that's bob on. I think the best teams that I've been part of are the ones where you really care about the people that you're doing it with. And there's this analogy that I'm just going to bring in about the red arrows. So the red arrows have very specific criteria for when they recruit for the red arrows. Certain amount of flight experience, something else, and you have to be a good person. And you can be the best pilot in the world, the most amount of flying hours or whatever, but if you're a terrible person, they won't hire you. And the reason is, they think, is that when you're flying an inch away from somebody else's wingtip, it really, really matters whether you like that person or not. And I think it's quite poignant that it made me think about how when Rob Baxter recruits people at Exeter, for example, that's one of his criteria, is he recruits people based on, obviously they have to be a good rugby player and all the rest of it, but he recruits whether he thinks they're going to fit into their culture and whether they're good men. Obviously it's a men's sports team, is why I said men, just to clarify. There are also women's teams as well. But I think it made me think about high performing teams. It's all well and good just being task focused. We're all focused on this thing and everybody just buys in. But if you get those interdependent relationships spot on, you're dependent on each other, you trust one another, communication flows better. So how do we encourage that high relationship dependency between people without it being softball in the car park or forced fun?
Yeah, no, absolutely, about kind of collaboration and also kind of shared goals and visions, which we talked about a little bit in leadership, is if everyone's pulling towards the same goal is quite powerful, right? If everyone feels that they're contributing towards the same effort. So we're going to leave it there. We're going to leave you with sort of 7 questions that Dave Ulrich talks about in his book that can help managers identify areas where they could improve. So essentially 7 questions for managers to drive abundance. We'll leave them at the end of this short session, and also we'll leave you the link to some interesting podcasts at the bottom of the video, along with some other interesting resources. So hope you found.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.